Hello everyone, Ben from Joe Bean here. Today I'm going to be showing you how to brew a pour over with the Fellow Stag pour over method here. So we've got our kettle, we've got our pour over device, we've got our filters, and we're going to be using a Peruvian coffee from Gonzalo Guevara Martinez today. First, let's talk about what the goal of brewing is. So when we are brewing coffee, we're passing hot water through ground coffee. That hot water is going inside the coffee and it's dissolving compounds and it's pulling out stuff from the ground coffee. And all that stuff mixes together to make our beverage. When we're brewing, we're trying to pull out as much content, as much stuff out of those beans as possible before we get to any unpleasant, harsh, bitter, astringent type flavors. A few things that are going to help us do that by being as even as possible and making sure that all the coffee and all the water are interacting evenly. We're going to be able to pull out more content before we get to some of those unpleasant flavors. Using a nice grinder is also a great way to make sure that we're able to pull out more. Different grinders produce more or less consistent grind sizes, and less consistent grind sizes start to produce unpleasant flavors quicker than more consistent grind sizes do. The first thing you will need is a scale. We'll use this to both measure our dry coffee as well as the amount of water that we are pouring over the coffee. We highly recommend using a gooseneck kettle that has this precision pouring spout on it. Gives you a lot more accuracy and control over the amount of water that you're adding to the coffee. And this particular model will also allow us to precisely set the temperature of the water inside the kettle. You'll need your pour over device. We'll be using the Fellow Stag pour over. This fits right into your mug or your vessel, and then also comes with a small funnel as well as a measuring cup, and everything nests in together nice and neatly. You will need your vessel to brew into. You can either use something like this glass decanter, which is nice especially if you're brewing multiple cups, or you can brew directly into a mug of your choosing. If your scale does not have a built-in timer, you'll want an independent timer to use as well. And you will need coffee to brew with. And today we're going to be using this Peruvian coffee. So today what we're going to be using is 42 grams of dry coffee and 680 grams of water that we're going to pour through that coffee. And that's going to fill this whole thing. That's going to give us 2 cups. If we wanted to do a single cup, we're going to be using 21 grams of dry coffee and 340 grams of water, so half the amount. In a commercial setting, it's really useful to pre-measure our doses. So I've got 2 21-gram doses pre-weighed out here. So for the 2 cup that we're going to be brewing today, I'm going to grind both of these together. When you are trying to figure out how to adjust your grinder for a pour over, it can be a little confusing. There's so many grind settings available, and there's a lot of information about what grind setting you should be using for your brewer. The reality is the best grind setting is going to be very specific to your equipment, your water, the coffee that you're using. So it's really something that you have to experiment around a little bit with to figure out what the best setting is. What I like to do is start with a grind setting and then go progressively finer and finer and finer as I make batches, as I brew pour overs, and tasting each one as I'm going. And what you start to notice is that it's going to become more flavorful, but then at a certain point you reach a tipping point and it starts to become unpleasant, starts to get a little bit harsh, a little tannic, bitter, astringent type flavors. So once we find that spot, we just go one step back from there on our grinder. And that's typically how I like to dial in a brand new grinder. So let's go ahead and get started here. So the first thing we're gonna do is take our paper filter, put it into our pour over method. These filters have these little ridges that are a little bit easy to bend. So just be careful when you are handling them that you don't flatten out the ridges or bend the shape. So we're gonna put it into our pour over, and we're gonna take hot water and pour it through the paper filter. This is going to rinse out any of the papery tastes and smells from the paper filter, and is also going to help preheat our pour over as well as whatever we are brewing into. While this is preheating, I'm gonna go ahead and grind my coffee. When you're grinding your coffee, one tip to keep in mind is to start your grinder before you pour your dry coffee in. Starting your grinder first is gonna allow those burrs to spin fully up to speed so that when you pour your coffee in, all the coffee is being ground the exact same way. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and pour out my pre-wet water. And then to pour the coffee in, Fellow has this little funnel device here that sits right on the inside. And this will help us make sure that we're not getting any coffee into these little ridges or outside of the filter area in the pour over. So pour our ground coffee in. So the idea with this type of filter is that because you have all these little ridges, it helps separate the filter away from the walls of the pour over method. One thing that can happen with pour overs is that if the filter is really making full contact with the wall of the pour over device, the water has a tendency to slip a little bit faster along the wall, so you can get some uneven interaction around the outsides of your coffee. So with these ridged filters, it theoretically helps keep your pour over a little bit more even, a little bit more consistent. I should also mention too, the way that this pour over is shaped, it has the ridges, but it is slightly pitched inward, which will help get a little bit more even. It helps mitigate some of the issues of water favoring one side or the other side a little bit more. And then this is also a double walled filter, so it's insulated, which is going to help us maintain our target brew temp when we are brewing coffee. Our water is at 204 degrees here, so we are ready to get brewing. So I'm going to go ahead and start my timer. Dry coffee can absorb a little bit more than twice its weight in water. So what we're going to do is pour 100 grams of water over our 42 grams of coffee. And pouring this water over, we're going to let it absorb into the grounds. And as it pulls that water in through capillary action, it's going to help push out some of the CO2 in there. And it's going to make all of our coffee a little bit more receptive to the fresh, hot water we're going to be pouring over it. So once I no longer see bubbling happening, I'm going to go ahead and start my first pour. I'm going to do my pours in 150 gram increments. And you can see I'm slowly going in small circles around the circumference of the brewing area, trying to get that water spread nice and evenly across the surface. I'm going to keep doing this until I hit my first goal post of 250 grams of water. And we'll give it a small swirl to make sure that everything is nice and evenly incorporated. And we're going to let the water drain through the coffee grounds until I can just start to see the grounds in the top here. All right. And again, we're going to pour 150 more grams of water. And I'm making an effort to keep my stream a nice steady size. I want it to not introduce too much turbulence into the top here, which can cause unpleasant flavors, but I do want to introduce enough turbulence where we are evenly mixing the grounds together and pulling out what we want to from the coffee. So I'm going to keep pouring until I hit my next goal post of 400 grams. And again, we'll give it a small little swirl, keep everything nice and even. And once I see those grounds, we resume pouring. If you pour too quickly, the water is going to move through the coffee without having a chance to fully extract, to fully pull out all the stuff in that coffee that we want to get. And you're going to end up with coffee that tastes a little bit thin and might have some unpleasant tastes. Under-extracted coffees have a tendency to taste acidic without sweetness, so you get that kind of harsh sourness to it. And they can also taste a little bit vegetal, a little bit grassy, and just feel overall like they're lacking in sweetness. Most of the time when someone's complaining about coffee not tasting right, 9 times out of 10 the coffee's under-extracted. So we really have to work to get a full extraction out of the coffee, and it can be surprisingly easy to confuse under-extracted tastes with over-extracted tastes. So if you're ever trying to problem solve, it's a safe bet to guess that you might have under-extracted the coffee before you start making changes. So once we hit our target end weight of 680 grams, we can stop pouring. We can give it a nice big swirl, help everything descend nice and evenly, and we'll let the water fully drain through the coffee into our beverage down below. And while this is draining, we're looking to see what our bed shape looks like. What we'd like to see is a nice even flat bed, which tells us that the water and the coffee all descended evenly together. If we see something that's slanted to one side or the other side, that tells us that the water did not descend evenly. And again, when we have uneven interaction, that's when you get some less pleasant tastes out of the coffee. So by keeping everything nice and even, your coffee is going to taste a little bit sweeter. All right, and that is our finished brew. So we can go ahead and taste this and see how we did. All right, so let's give this guy a taste. This coffee is still very hot, so I'm going to let it cool off a little bit before I taste it so that I can get the full flavor of the coffee and so I don't burn my tongue. It smells good. So when we're tasting the coffee, we are looking to see how well we extracted it. Again, if we under-extract coffee, coffees have a tendency to taste sour without a full sweetness to them. They can taste a little bit vegetal, maybe grassy, maybe a little bit thin, and can just feel a little bit harsh without any sweetness and feels like it's lacking. If we were to over-extract the coffee, we're going to start getting some more stiff, tannic, astringent, bitter type flavors out of the coffee. And that's typically not something that we see in most brews. 9 times out of 10, if your brew is not tasting right, it's usually a matter of under-extracting. If we unevenly interact with the coffee, you can get some kind of dirty, off flavors. Sometimes it feels like it is missing the sweetness but has some kind of weird, harsh qualities to it. If you can't quite figure out why it's not tasting right, unevenness is also a really common issue. And again, the solution is either to pour more carefully through the top to be a little bit more attentive with how we swirl it, or it might be time to look at your grinder maybe swap out to a fresh set of burrs that are going to give you more even grind, or possibly upgrade to a nicer grinder. So let's give this guy a taste. Big brown sugar flavor right up front. Got a little bit of that kind of juicy, apricot-y. I'm getting kind of like a dandelion floral thing with this right now. Green tea, definitely a lot of floral characteristics. But yeah, this is tasting great, and I feel very happy with this brew. To find other really tasty coffees or to see some other brewing tips, check out our website over at joebeanroasters.com.